Today we have Will Collum joining us. Will was a programmer at Timex Computer Corporation in the mid-'80s. I had a brief chat with Will, and one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating was that Will could recall from memory the code that he wrote 39 years ago. He could recall the instructions, which was absolutely fascinating. Will, I'll let you talk about your career, but and we're while we're primarily interested in Timex, we're also interested in just
Sure.
what you've done and where you've been and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So with that, I'm going to let you take it away, Will, because you're the expert on you.
All right. My career has been sort of a multifaceted thing, I guess. I was one of those people that when I was graduating high school and kids get told to go do what you love, I really didn't love doing anything. I needed to find something I could tolerate for 8 hours a day. And so I thought about music and art because I did those as hobbies. And eventually I thought about math because math came kind of easy. But eventually I was convinced that the jobs were in engineering. So I got my engineering degree and I got out of school in 1980, electrical engineering. And my career began as a test engineer for my first couple of jobs. The first one was with the government on an Air Force base in Georgia. I'm from South Carolina originally, and I'm actually in the house that I was living in when I was a teenager. I bought it from my dad a few years ago. Well, 20 plus years ago now. So anyway, I wound up in Connecticut on a job as a test engineer, and Timex popped up with a design slot open, and they were about 40 miles away. I was living in Danbury. Timex was in Waterbury. So I applied for the job and went up to Timex, and they were just starting the computer project. All the machines that you guys probably know a lot better than I do at this point. And so I was there. I was at Timex for about a year, and just about everybody there was there for a little over a year. It was not a long-lived kind of thing. I worked for Scott McCourt, who ran the software group, and a couple of friends that were there already. Scott had brought some people in from Burroughs. So two of the programmers, Dave Boyle and Lon Hildreth and Scott, all came from Burroughs. I was the only one with a background in hardware. They were all computer science guys. And Scott eventually married one of the hardware engineers, is still married to her today. I have Lon and Scott on my Facebook friends list, actually. Anyway, I was at Timex for about a year. And there were several companies that made runs at the under $200 computer market that year, and they all lost a fortune. And so Timex, being owned by one guy, Fred Olson, decided he had had enough of that. So we all got let go. And so I interviewed and played tennis for 2 months, and eventually wound up going out to Colorado Springs with Honeywell. And I was there for about 5.5 years. And that's when I wound up being more of an IT type person rather than a designer of products. So I wrote engineering applications that ran on the VAX for the process engineers. It was a silicon factory, a wafer fab. Stayed there for a while, and then I went up to digital equipment for a while. I had a climbing partner that worked at Digital and helped me get a job up there. And so this is in the late 80s. I went to Digital in 89. I was there for a little over 2 years, or right at 2 years. And my wife at the time and we had sort of figured that we either needed to put down roots and stay put or make a move to the next adventure. So I sent my resume out to Aramco in Saudi Arabia, and we went over there for 5.5 years. And that was a pretty interesting experience, as you might imagine. At tail end of 96, I'd had enough of that. And we came back to Columbia. My father was still living in this house. There's a pond out front. You can't see it. That's part of the property. And I didn't want this property to leave the family. So we came back here and I began a series of jobs that are just in IT. I did teach for a while with Learning Tree International. I taught Intro to Visual C++ and Intro to Oracle for about 5 years, 6 classes a year while I had other jobs. And I worked for Safety Clean. I don't know if that name rings a bell. They built parts washers that you would see in auto shops. Worked for Safety Clean for a while. Then I worked for AgFirst Farm Credit Bank for almost 15 years right here in Columbia. And I managed the database administration group. So I had a group of 14 DBAs for quite a while. And then that group, they changed sides of the house that reported to. We changed from the operations side of the house to the development side of the house. And he didn't particularly like the way I ran the group. And so I got escorted out of the building one day. And so I've been working as kind of a DBA and an integration programmer ever since, doing PowerShell and complex queries on SQL for people. So I'm working for a company called BAE Systems, and they have the contract to provide computing services to the United States Department of Justice. So that's what I do these days. And luckily enough, they're going to let me work from home, possibly until I retire in a few years, which is nice.
That sounds pretty fantastic. So, and you also play an instrument or two, right?
Yeah, I play in a duo right now. I play bass and lead guitar and a little bit of piano. So there's a lot of computer geeks and engineers that have music as a hobby. It's all that mathematical pattern recognition type stuff is really intrinsic to music.
So, I got to tell you a joke about the bass. I also play bass. Well, the joke is, you know, somebody asks the bass player, "Do you play bass?" And the bass player says, "Yes, I own a bass." You know, because the bass is a moderately difficult instrument to master.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, as a matter, we had a gig just the other night. Actually, it went real well. So that was good. So that's kind of the 5-minute or less version of my career.
Sure. So can you tell us about what you did at Timex?
At Timex, yeah. So I was in the software group. This was all. I'm hearing a jet go over. I'm pretty close to the airport. This was all Z80 assembly language. I don't even know if anybody there were very few and far between C compilers maybe for the Z80 back then. But anyway, we were working in assembly. And one of the first things we were given, I believe it was Ian Logan's book with the ROM disassemblies. So we were given Xerox copies of those things, both the 16K Spectrum and the 8K, what I guess it was the Sinclair ZX81 or whatever. We were given Xerox copies of those, of the ROM disassemblies. And we had a few things we needed to do to those to make them transition into the product that Timex wanted to sell. And one of the things that I got to do, which is what David was chuckling about earlier, was I got to write the code that would make, I guess it was the little one, detect a cartridge and run the cartridge if it was present, and ignore it if there was no cartridge there. And so, yes, I still remember the code to do that. It was like 5 instructions long, something like that. There wasn't much to it. And I do not know why I remember that code so well, but I do. It seemed like an elegant little solution at the time. And there wasn't any space in those ROMs. The ROM I was working on had exactly 2 bytes free, and they were not located next to each other. And so I had to scavenge a few instructions out of a memory test routine that was part of the boot up code, and make a cartridge run. So that's what I remember doing. And David had mentioned there's other things done to those ROMs in the bigger machine, and there were three other people in the software group, and I to this day don't really remember what the rest of them were working on. There were a few ends here and there, but I don't really know.
So was that the? Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What was that the main thing that you worked on? Were there other projects that related to either of those computers?
I worked on them both, but there was most of that code went into the Timex machines untouched. Most of it was the Sinclair code. We had licensed the design, and it's a long time ago. I remember that one thing so perfectly well, but I don't remember the rest very well. I remember we played a lot of Anti-Attack after we found out we were going to get laid off. Does anybody have the Anti-Attack game on there now?
It's funny you should mention that, because I was just doing some screen captures of some software, and I think that was one of the ones that I just did the other day.
but nobody has a running version?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a whole world of Spectrum folks who have done tremendous, documentation preservation efforts, and that's one of the things that's available.
So, Anti-Attack, is that the black and white? Well, okay, it is a black and white game, but it's on the Spectrum, and it's like in 3D, and you have to throw bombs, right? And set off bombs, right?
Yeah, you had to work your way through these funny little structures laying on this field and go find the girl, and if you got near her, she would follow you back.
Yeah, it's kind of a famous game in the Spectrum world because it was all written on paper, and it's all been archived. Like, people have scanned in like the original source code, because it was like he didn't have an assembler, so he hand coded it on paper and then converted it all by hand into a machine language.
Well, and we had no idea, there were a few hunks of software that were going to be commercially available that popped up that we got to see, like I say, before we all got let go. And I don't even remember when they let us go. I think it was in the early part, it would have been the early part of 1984, January or February or something. There came a point to where it was clear that it was all going to get shut down. And I think for about the last 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, maybe, we sat around and played video games on the machines all day long. And Anti-Attack was everybody's favorite. It's a really fun game, actually, I thought. So yeah, there were the Timex factory where that was done. It was a big, long, 1-story building sitting on the crest of a hill. And you could kind of walk out the back part of the part where we were. There were watch designers and other people sitting within about 100 feet of us. But if you went down to the back of the building and started down the hallway, you got to the manufacturing floor, where they were on spools of sheet metal stripped about this wide. They were stamping out watch gears and watch parts. I remember walking back there and watching that go on. That was pretty neat.
Oh, that's crazy. It never even occurred to me that the manufacturing facility for the watch parts would be in Connecticut.
Yeah, it was. And they were starting to get big into electronic watches at the time, and a lot of those were made by a Japanese company called Handok in Japan. And Timex didn't even make most of those, I think, at the time. So the old mechanical watch parts were still being punched out in that same building while we were there. I don't know how long that lasted.
So I don't know if you know this, there was an afterlife for the 1500, that machine that you wrote the code for. There was a company called Parker Electronics that did a project for Carrier, the HVAC company, right?
Right.
And they took the 1500 and they built this little interface device, HVAC interface device, and a little jumper board, and just slapped the 1500 on top of it. I've never actually seen one in person, so I haven't had a chance to look at the ROM or anything. But my suspicion is they somehow either rewrote the ROM or stuck another ROM in it, to run this HVAC thing. But this pops up on eBay every once in a while, and it's this bizarre looking creature. I'll bring up a picture for you in a sec.
Okay. Didn't the 1500 finally turn out to have a gray plastic case, and the gray, it was like a Spectrum in a different color?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And
Okay.
a little while back, we had on Gary Grimes, who was the industrial designer who joined Timex in January,
Right.
and did all the design sketches that ended up being the 2068. And then he
Okay.
did what he's in essence converted the Spectrum case into the 1500 case, did the color work and stuff like that.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I remember thinking that was pretty cool, because the Spectrum case I liked, with the little rubber keys. And so, yeah, it's like everything got migrated up to the next case up, kind of thing.
There's
So,
an example of one.
yeah, that's it. Yeah. Wow. Where do you guys get these things? Are they floating around on eBay and stuff? Or yeah.
Typically, yes, I found mine. It was a part of this national education kit that they created that came with a tape player and instruction manuals that I guess you would go and learn how to program.
Right.
And it's in a briefcase. Actually, I'll show you the briefcase. Just in a black briefcase that you would take.
Seriously?
Yeah, and inside of it, they have, kind of see the,
Watch your fingers. Watch your fingers.
I know. It's got
Yeah,
the
yeah,
cassette
look like you-
player. It's got everything that you need for it. It's not focusing in very well.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, I see. That's good.
Yeah, Carl actually brought over his yesterday. We were looking through all the manuals, and
Wow.
I thought that they would be teaching assembly language by the end, because there's 12 booklets, and but they don't. They just, it's
No,
pretty,
it's
no pun intended, but it's pretty basic. Even by
it
the
is
end,
very
it's
basic.
yeah, it is.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
let
it is neat. Yeah.
I'm
I'm not-
gonna share my screen real quick here so you guys can see this this ridiculous thing. So here's this weird device that and you can see there's this metal box underneath, right? And
Right.
they made a new little inlay that says it's got the Carrier logo over here, and it says something command. I think it says CC02 Command Center, right? And Scott mentioned, here's the briefcase that
Right.
Scott mentioned. I thought I had another photo of it, and then people still didn't like the keyboard, so they made their own keyboard. This is a TI 99.4A keyboard that was easy to
Wow.
rewire into
Okay.
the Spectrum matrix, the Sinclair matrix. Yeah, so folks would do that, and this
Amazing.
person clearly just cut up their something. No, that looks like some other kind of, they did their own custom work. Yeah,
That's
somewhere
really
I've got some
cool.
more pictures of that Parker thing. I wonder if I don't see it. I'll see if I can find it and bring it up. It's
Okay.
bizarre.
I
bizarre.
would almost guess that none of the design team ever owned one of these things.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
makes sense.
we were there, we did the work, we finished up the products, they hit the market, everybody lost $1 gazillion. And we were, Scott McCourt, I think, was in his early 30s at the time. I think the other engineers like me were in their mid 20s. And so when they shut us all down, we were just gone. It was just on to the next job. And, I wasn't married yet. My girlfriend was living with me. So like I say, we moved out to Colorado, and there was not a lot of time to think about getting back into that world of little computers. We just, had to go make a living. And yeah, it was kind of a wild time, and it was a long time ago.
So I got the other Parker thing. I'm going to bring that up. Well, it sounds like Adam, you want to say something?
Well, I do have a question because Timex, this was in the summer of '84, right? When this happened?
Well, we got let go in say probably the winter of '84, because I was in Colorado. I started my job in Colorado by about May,
Okay.
and I hadn't worked in a couple of months. So this was no later than March that I'm talking about.
Well, I just there's around the same period of time there was a lot of companies that were having trouble. One of them, namely, being Atari, and you heard like they had 10,000 employees, which is not the same number as Timex had. And in the course of just a few months, they went from 10,000 to 3,000 to less. And you hear stories about the people at Atari like saying, "Oh yeah, well, like they just let us take whatever," or sometimes they didn't, they took it anyway. I was just wondering if anyone was given some unusual items at Timex, or if you saw some things that were unusual happening as the company was closing down.
I did not have any. I don't remember anybody, having that stuff. And the number of employees at Timex that worked on this thing, I bet there weren't 40 people there. It was not a large operation. There were 4 people in the software group, a couple people in the hardware group. You guys talked to the industrial designers that did the design work and the coloring on the outside. I don't remember ever running across any more than about, I don't know, 25 people or so that were directly involved in these products, because the bulk of the design work was done by Sinclair. All the hard part was done by Sinclair.
Well, with the 2068, you guys did a lot of sort of re-engineering to add the bank switching features and added in the sound chip and the cartridge slot. And there's the whole second ROM chip that got added to support a bunch of that stuff. And we talked about this a little bit on the phone about how you can build a cartridge with a basic program, a basic language program on the cartridge and run that from the cartridge. And I know I can think of at least 2 folks who did that, several years after, like in '85 or later. One was a guy named Tom Woods, and he had written a sort of database program for the ZX81, the 1000, and would store a reasonable amount of information in 16K. I mean, it was pretty ingenious. And then he rewrote that or ported it to the 2068, and there was a lot more memory, right? And it ran in the 2068, but then and you would load it off of tape. But then at some point, he or somebody else turned that into a cartridge, and so you could stick this cartridge, in your 2068, and you had all of the RAM, practically all of the RAM available for your data, which was like 27K or maybe a little bit more. For somebody who used it to, I know some folks used it to do mailing lists and stuff, and so that was kind of a big jump. And it's not my, I've read up about a lot of other contemporary home computers, and that particular feature is not something that I've encountered in any of the other systems where especially with you could just, it was such a low level of entry for folks to make a cartridge. You didn't have to rewrite it in machine language. You just had to do a little bit of magic to move it to the right place, and then you were golden. And there were some restrictions, but so there's a lot of folks who kind of look at the 2068 and say,
David, can I ask you a quick, so is that function available on the 1500 too? No,
the
right?
running, no
basic, right? Not from cart.
No, not from the cartridge. No.
Yeah.
All those cartridges are machine language.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. But that's not, I mean, that was a real, to me, that was a real sort of significant advance of the time. You know, and I kind of, I assume it was the Burroughs guys, or the former Burroughs guys that came up with that stuff.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about, how that was done. And,
Yeah.
I had mentioned to you on the phone the other day that among my siblings who are all older than me, I am famously oblivious to the world around me. And I've been hearing that a long time. That you guys know a whole lot more about these machines than I do by now. It's
Not me. I'm the ignorant one here.
Adam's our neophyte. He's the baby of the group.
That's true. I'm only new to this for a little while. So
yeah, it's for me it was an interesting time. It was my transition from a test engineer to a designer, and I didn't want to spend my whole career as a test engineer. I wanted to try to do other things, and so I wound up writing software on medium-sized systems. And Timex was this one little bizarre year that went on. Not sure what else to say about it. So,
let me show you those pictures of the Parker real quick unit. Let me see, hit the share. So I showed you this one. Here's the back side of it, and you can see this little jumper that they put in, and who knows what these switches are for. And here's the interface to the HVAC system. And two of these things have showed up on the internet. This one's a little different in terms of what its connections are. And so this is a screen capture of an ad. And apparently they also bought the printers and relabeled them as their own printers. All of which just makes me wonder, what on earth somebody who had this installed in their, plant or whatever thought, what is this thing that, looks like a computer and yet it controls my HVAC system? Because it just strikes. I mean, I understand the beauty of reusing it because it's a Z80-based system and it's powerful and etc. But it's like, what are all these? Somebody must have looked at this and said, what do all these keys mean, and what is what's going on here?
I would guess that would be used in the industrial setting at Carrier, like the company, right? Like that wasn't given, because I have a Carrier heat exchanger up on my roof. Yeah. And it's not like I can imagine Carrier installing that and then being like, oh, obviously this is modern age, but I can't imagine them giving me a computer to be like, here's how to control your air conditioner, and your heater.
So my suspicion is that it has a custom ROM in it that, runs the thing, or, and now thinking about it, because
it was probably used for testing purposes, don't you think? Like at the factory?
I mean, that would these are production units. And you know what? Thinking about Will's code, that ROM probably lives at 2000 and is on the board, inside that second unit. So because that would make the ultimate amount of sense. You don't have to open up the 1500 at all. You just throw everything on that second circuit board and take advantage of the fact that it'll look for something at 2000 and put your custom code there, and then you can just leverage everything that the Sinclair already had in it.
There was a fire sale of those, right? I mean, they couldn't get rid of them fast enough.
Yes, there was.
Couldn't give them away. So, from a Carrier point of view, it makes a lot of sense. You don't have to build a brand new platform from scratch. You already have something that has the ability to do pretty much everything you needed to do. You just need an interface, right? And that's where it's pretty ingenious. I wish I could run across one on eBay because it'd be a cool little collectible thing. But I can certainly see. I mean, they were giving them away as door prizes. I remember the TS1000s, right? They were door prizes because they couldn't offload them quickly enough, right, out of their storage units.
The other Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead,
no,
Carol.
I was going to start going into. Well, first off, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. That's
sure. No problem.
Like you said, that's a long time ago, and it was for a fairly short period of time in your life. So I totally get that. But I've been lately getting more interested in the cartridge feature of the 1500, or obviously it works on the 1000 as well, right? It doesn't auto start because it doesn't have that code.
Right.
You have to actually tell it to run. But anyway, on the 1500, somebody reverse engineered the little 1510 cassette dock, right? That Timex made for that. And there were apparently 4 cartridges that were made, right? The States and Capitals, Chess, Super Math, and Flight Simulator, right? That supposedly got made. I haven't been able to get any of those. I'd like to get at least one of them so I could have a cartridge that actually works in mine, because I have a
Right.
15. Well, I actually have 2 of the 1510s. They're pretty hard to come by. But anyway, that's kind of why people have made a clone of it, of the 1510. And so I ordered up some circuit boards, and built it up myself. I actually need to cut up my connectors, but anyway, I'm almost there. And I've been looking at the code, right, of how that auto starts, how you kind of, elegantly recovered some of the the memory check, right? Because it was like the 1500 came with 16K, so that was an assumption that you could make for any of those machines.
Right.
Whereas the previous version, you had either the 2K that was in there or the RAM pack. So you kind of had to do a check there to see where your end of RAM was. Well, on the 1500, you didn't have to do that. So I can understand why you scavenged that area of the code, because I understand that, okay, we're assuming these have 16K, so we don't need to check. I don't know if you kind of remember some of that, but
yeah, it wasn't, there wasn't an assumption on that part. It's just that there wasn't any space. I had to delete some code in order to write some code. I mean, there was, like I say, there were 2 bytes free in that ROM, and they were not located next to each other. So, and then Scott says, well, you need to make this run a cartridge. I'm like, yeah, really? And
but yeah, so, well, I've read places that that's kind of what maybe the assumption was. This has 16K, so we don't necessarily need to check for end of RAM, right? So you don't need that extra code. Anyway, that being said, right, I noticed, well, apparently you didn't do too much on the 2068 as far as its cartridge capabilities, right?
That's probably right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that one has we have like an AROS, which is an application specific cartridge, and then there's an LROS, which is a language specific.
Okay.
And basically what that boils down to is, language, and LROS can actually take over the ROM, right? You can just turn off the built-in ROM on the 2068, and the LROS can run the machine doing whatever it needs to.
Okay.
AROS is more of an application, right? So it needs the 2068 ROM to be there, but it's basically what most cartridges are, right? It can either be a basic cartridge, kind of like what David mentioned, or it can be a machine language, or it can be a mix, right, in the AROS. But anyway, on the 1500, I was looking at the code, for the cartridges that people have dumped, basically everything but the flight simulator one. The other 3 they've dumped.
Okay.
And I can see where you're checking basically for 2000, you're looking for 01, right? If 01 is there, then the cartridge is there, right?
Not
That's
quite.
it.
No,
Okay.
That's not really how it works.
All right.
So the way it works is, if there's no cartridge, the pull-up resistors will cause the data bus to float high, and you'll read it as FF. So the code that I remember is load HL was 2000. So you're going to point it at the beginning of the cartridge. Then you're going to increment what HL is pointing at. And if there's no cartridge, it's pointing at an address that's going to return FF. So it'll increment to 0 if there's no cartridge. And so it'll set the 0 flag, and then you do a jump on 0 and skip an instruction and then continue booting. And if it is got a cartridge, it'll have anything in it but FF, so it increments to non-0, and you don't skip, and that next instruction is a jump to 2000.
Oh, okay. I thought the code, okay. Because I know the cartridges themselves have 01 there in 8000.
Yeah, I think if I remember, I want to say that 01 is something like load BC with a value.
Right, as an opcode, right.
As an opcode. So
right.
01 was something safe, that you could always start a program by loading BC.
Yeah, it didn't crash the machine or anything, obviously. Yeah.
That's right. So anyway, that's how it works. And it was relying on the fact that the bus would float high
Right.
without a cartridge. And Scott was kind of, cool that I was able to figure that out, because like I say, the other guys in the group were comp sci guys. They didn't know that the data
Right.
bus would do that. I did, because I was an engineer. So it was just lucky I was in the right place, the right time. That's all.
Well,
So
like,
kind of,
I want to say before, Carl, before you came on, we chatted for just a minute before the meeting started, and I told Will there was going to be someone coming on who was going to stump him, and he was like, probably so, because I don't know if I remember, but hey, great job, Will, great job.
well, the reason I'm kind of asking this is I kind of see how it's with the 2068, we have header bytes, right? They call them header bytes for these cartridges, which
Right.
basically tell the system, what kind of cartridge it is, where the memory, it's some housekeeping things, right? That are in I think there's 8 bytes that are for the header.
Okay.
And I was wondering on the 1500 cartridges, because I always see, I don't know, there's maybe 4 or 5 bytes in the beginning that are the same on all the cartridges.
Okay.
Right. So I'm kind of assuming that must be some type of header information where, I don't know if you recall if there was, because, obviously that had a very short life, and I could have envisioned, seeing maybe third-party folks making their own cartridges for that system, right? Obviously Timex made the 4, and that was pretty much the end of that, and nobody really cared. And so, but there's no documentation of any kind of header bytes, right, for that cartridge setup that's for the 1500.
Yeah, I don't know anything. This is going to sound ridiculous, but I haven't got a clue as to what was put in the cartridges. All I did was get it started.
Okay.
I was responsible for seeing if it was there and then jumping to it. And that 01 rings a bell. If you disassemble the code, there's kind of a chance that I could have done a decrement to hit the 0 and
I
do it
believe
that
that's
way.
right. I believe that's what it is, because that's why they need an 01 there. Because you decrement it goes to 0, like you said, you get the 0 flag, and you can jump on yours. Yeah.
So there was either an increment of the FF or a decrement of the 01, and one or the other, it set the 0 flag, and it would jump to the cartridge if it thought the cartridge was present.
Okay.
So my memory is not that perfect, but I'm sure it would be one or the other.
Yes. Yeah, I believe it's a decrement, because that's why the 01 and it goes to 0. Yeah, because that's what if I'm trying to, again, like you, I mean, I've seen the code recently, like in the last few months, but I don't have it committed in memory, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay. So
it would make sense to me, that it's, since they're putting 01 in the cartridge, that's what's in the cartridge. I just looked that up right now before I
Okay. And
so,
that's all these years I've been remembering it as FF, but
okay.
But that's okay. It's the 01, like I say, I'm almost positive that's a load BC with an immediate value. And,
right.
I haven't written any Z80 code since then. I never wrote another line of Z80 after Timex.
Wow.
I started writing Pascal and other, 3rd generation languages after that. That was my last assembly that I did for a living.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, kind of, another reason I kind of want to understand is I want to make newer, I want to make a cartridge for the 1500 or the 1000. So I'm trying to understand what they're putting in those, 4 bytes.
Well, the first 3 bytes would be the load BC instruction, right? So that's 3 of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's always 01, 0, and 0. Right. So, and then there's like a DE, I had to look it up, but there's, like I said, they're always the same on all 4 of all 3 of the cartridges. Okay. And so you may be right. Maybe since BC needs 2 more bytes to load the operands and for that instruction, that's why they're always 0. And like you said,
Yeah.
you can run the code and it's not going to crash the system. It's just going to, okay, it loads PC with whatever and goes to the next instruction. It's not it's not a destructive instruction to crash the system. And maybe the next ones are related to that, but
exactly.
I'm just kind of thinking, because I'm a big fan of 3D Monster Maze, and it takes a long time to load
Okay.
from cassette.
Right.
And I mean, there are emulators. There are, like the ZX Expand, and actually Evie just came out with her Backbit Pro cartridge that she made an adapter for the Timex 1000, and that's very similar to the ZX Expand, which uses an SD card, right? So you load everything from an SD
Wow.
card.
Carl,
And
Amazing.
Yeah, Carl,
Uh,
you just took us in a different direction there real quick. To give us, I think I know who you're talking about, but can you catch everybody else up on that?
well, I don't know her last name, but it's Evie. She's got a YouTube channel, Evie's Reviews or something like that. And so she makes, she's got a bunch of old vintage hardware, right?
Yeah.
Commodore 64s, VIC 20s, Timex was her first machine. That's why I guess she's kind of got a little soft spot in her heart for that machine.
Wow.
Anyway, she made this cartridge, and the problem with the ZX Expand or even the DIB is pretty much locked to the Spectrum or the Timex 1000, right? Her cartridge, I think currently it can run on like 12 systems. It uses adapters. You plug the cartridge into this adapter, which obviously adapts the cartridge electrically to the connector, right? That's on that particular system. So VIC 20 needs a big cartridge connector, right? The Commodore 64 is similar. It doesn't have as big. It's obviously much smaller than the VIC 20s. But anyway, and even the TI-99, I know she makes it for the MSX, the Panasonic MSX machine. Anyway, that's kind of cool from her standpoint that she has one cartridge that can run on all these different machines, including the ZX Spectrum. She's already got an adapter for the Spectrum, so that works on the Spectrum. It works on the 1000 and the 1500 and the ZX81. But that's kind of where, I don't know how she's doing the software behind the scenes, right? But it loads up a menu system. So very similar to the DIMMC, where you can scroll around in your directory and you can, store programs in there, and then you can pick which one you want to start, and it, it starts it up, pretty much instantly, right? You don't have to wait for the cassette. So that's the cartridge, her cartridge. Hopefully that kind of gets people up to speed on that. But, again, my main thing is, I've built this little 1510 emulator, or not emulator, it's a hardware thing that, you put a flash chip on, program, your cartridge into the flash chip, and it's got a dip switch on it where you can pick one of 4 cartridges, right, that are on that 32K, SRAM or flash chip. And I kind of was looking maybe at the intention of probably selling these to some folks, but the main thing is, if you can't make new cartridges, what's the point? Right? If I can't take a program that runs on the TS1000, and I'm not sure if it has to be machine language. That's kind of where because some of these things, they kind of just copy, where basic program would be in memory, right? They copy that, put it on the cartridge, and then, like you said, when you do a randomized user, I don't know how the basic would start at that point. Maybe there's some header information that you'd have to tell it, well, this is a basic program. I need you to run the basic interpreter and interpret what's coming, right? Machine language, obviously, is a different issue, but, I don't know States and Capitals was really a machine language program. It might have been. I haven't looked at the cassette version of it, right, and loaded it up, and maybe it is a basic program, right? Chess is probably machine language. States and Capitals, I have a hard time believing that that's the same language.
Carl,
that's a very simplistic program.
David said a little bit ago that he wasn't aware of any other systems. And here's my plug for the Astrocade again, this episode. But the Astrocade also, you could put basic cartridge or basic programs onto the cartridge. And I bet it works, if they are basic, it might work similarly, which what they do is the program loads it up into basic, and the cartridge, I don't know if this is how it works this way, but it's potential. They have a basic interpreter on the cartridge on the Astrocade and the program. So it moves it into RAM, and then the basic interpreter takes over from there, and it's just acting as if it loaded from tape.
So both the program and the interpreter are on the cartridge.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay,
That's how it works
interesting.
on the
Interesting.
Astrocade.
Okay.
But there's just one way it could be done. I doubt it's probably done like that here, but
Yeah, I mean, the interpreter's already in the ROM, right? You already have that
mm,
in
Yeah.
the 1000. So I think it's just telling the machine, how to, similarly to what the 2068 does, because I'm kind of thinking maybe the same people designed these two things that, because they were happening around the same time, right? Well, the 2068 design was happening. The 1500 design was actually earlier. But that machine was obviously much simpler, and they were just adding capability to it.
Yeah,
Very simple. Yeah.
both products were going on at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where, and I'm probably the only guy in the world that's kind of looking into this at this point in time, because, like I said, Timex made 4 cartridges and nobody really, I think, cared too much. I'm sure there's a few people out there that might have cared, and I get why. Actually, me and Adam were talking about
Yeah.
this yesterday,
well,
because
I do want to say I kind of obligated to care, because when you come over and you're showing me your system and you're telling me all about it, and I'm like, what, huh? What do you mean? Oh, and then you're like, by 9 o'clock last night, I was like, Carl, okay, you're starting to lose me now. But that was talking about the 2068 cartridge slot. But yeah,
Right,
it was a lot of fun. But yeah, it is.
I have some ideas on that, by the way, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway,
offline, yeah.
Yeah, but so yeah, I'm trying to, basically I want to make some new cassette cartridges for the 1500 of some Timex, 1000 software. And like, again, I think Scott was kind of nodding his head with me, like States and Capitals is a machine language program. I don't know. I there's no real graphics on it. It's all pretty much text based, if you've ever played the thing. And it's just, okay, well, this is the state, what's the capital of it, and you get it right, and I think it flashes, screen, it's black and white, but it flash, hey, congratulations, you got the answer right. But I don't know. I'll have to see the cassette version of it and see if that's assembly, because I just really have a hard time believing that they would convert that into an assembly language program. It's possible, not, but I don't think Timex was trying to put a lot of effort at that point into, and effort equals money, equals time, equals money, right? So they weren't really trying to put a lot of effort into, improving the system. Or maybe they didn't even think that third parties were going to make cartridges, right? They were just going to make cartridges for it, and that was going to be it.
What we were told by the time we were let go is that Fred Olson had lost $55 million on this.
Yeah,
that's just crazy.
That's gonna, when you've had enough of that, you're really gonna put a stop to things.
Right. And it's, unfortunately, probably him being the guy that he is, obviously, he's the owner of Timex or whatever. He doesn't have the foresight to see that, it's going to cost money to get where you want to go with that. Because honestly, if Timex proceeded, I think a lot of good things probably would have happened, for them.
Will, are you aware that the Timex computers continue to be used and made in Portugal?
David mentioned it the other day, but I was utterly unaware.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe. When I left that job, I remember getting together with the rest of the software group, plus Scott and Kim, and I don't know, I think we were drinking beer and shooting pool over at somebody's basement. And like I say, I interviewed and played tennis for 2 months and never saw another Timex machine again. And I moved to Colorado and we were all gone. It's like that year came and went and it was just over.
Here's a little tidbit for you, Will, is since they kept going on in Portugal.
Yeah, that's bizarre too.
Yeah, the 1500 obviously was designed probably by the USA engineers hardware wise, right? Because it had a new SCLD chip, or the glue logic chip.
Right.
It didn't use the Ferranti based, the Sinclair stuff. Timex wanted, for whatever reason, Timex made their own copy of it, basically. But I was looking at those pictures that I sent to the group earlier, and there's 2 versions of the 1500. So there's obviously the original version that the Timex made, right? It has 8 RAM chips, right? That has the 4164s, I think, or 4116s. 64 is why I'm giving it more credit than it needs. Anyway, so those chips are pretty old, right? They require 3 voltages, right? The 5 volts, the plus 12, and the minus 5 for them to do their memory thing.
Okay.
So on those systems, well, you start going to the Sinclair, the ZX Spectrum. What did memory chips today use? The same ones. So they had to have a switching regulator, right, on the motherboard to create 12 volts and minus 5 volts. It's a real simple circuit, just a coil and oscillator, right? No big deal there. But I noticed that Portugal at some point, their engineers must have said, hey, we want to make it cheaper. So on the pictures of that particular system, you look at the date codes on things. It's from early 1986. 86.
86. Wow. So
they simplified the design, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna
They
put one
used,
up real quick.
okay.
So that's the Portugal one?
Yes.
Is that what
See
you're
how
talking
it's-
about, Carl?
Yeah, see how it's simplified, right? There's only 2 RAM chips, right? They use the
Okay.
RAM chips that the Timex 2068 uses, the
Yeah.
4416s.
And the
Right.
date code on this is 84.
83, yeah, on that one. So that one
83,
kind
yes.
of is a strange one. That's because the one I saw was basically, I mean, it's the same thing. It is a simplified design like this. Only 2 RAM chips. And the original design for the 1500 used discrete decoder logic, 74 LS chips.
So, Carl, I think that this is a midpoint between the original design and that later
Oh
design.
my God, look at that.
Can you believe this?
Wow.
So Carl, here's the 24416s, right?
Right,
And,
right.
and this is a socketed SCLD. Actually, everything on here is socketed. The 74 LS 244, they just jump
Right.
it with resistors, both of them, right?
Yes.
And then they ran the individual address lines over to the 4416s. Isn't that crazy?
Data lines. Yep, that is kind of
Data lines.
Now
Yes,
notice, now notice how much is missing. Like go by where the power connector is.
right.
right?
Yeah.
Where
Right. It's
J41
missing.
is.
It's missing the
The coil.
The coil.
Coil's
Yep,
missing.
and then
and
the
all
doesn't need any
that.
of
capacitor and
that.
stuff.
Right. It doesn't need any of that.
And look at this.
Exactly.
This is, I've never seen this modulator before. This is a monster tank. It's heavy metal. It's thick.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And look at the ear and headphone jacks.
Yep,
Right. Those
yep,
are
yep,
kind of
non-standard.
newer design, right? Because they don't
Yeah.
use the Sinclair ones, whatever, like the power jack on this one is. That's what Sinclair was using for years, was
Yep.
that particular style. But anyway, yes. So you're on the head here. Well, anyway, Portugal made a system with all those integrations that were just shown there. So they got rid of 2 logic chips, right? They got rid of the 2. They're not decoders; they're basically buffers, right? That's why they could just
Yeah, the 244 is a buffer.
jumper them over with just resistors. So they took those 2 chips out. They got rid of 6 RAM chips. They got rid of the switching regulator to create 2 other voltages that they didn't need, right? So I imagine that must have been a much cheaper machine, right, to make. So I just kind of wanted to point that out that, hey, man, your design must have lived, I don't think they sold those here, but like I said, Portugal was making those overseas, and they must have been making those for their market. But hey, man, that thing must have lived on into at least, I'm going to say 87, 88 maybe.
Does anybody have any idea how many they might have made?
Bruno might know. I mean, why don't you talk about
So
because you live in Portugal, so.
I used to
Oh, you used to?
until
Okay.
I was 17. Then I moved to the US, LA. I was also in Brooklyn for a couple of years. I could talk about this for hours, but I don't have the technical knowledge that you guys have as far as hardware. What would you like to know? I also have some interesting stuff to show if anyone wants to see old things.
So Bruno, you used to have a website, right? A long time ago with Timex stuff on it.
That's Johnny Red. He still does.
Okay, so I must be thinking of somebody else who had a US based website. That was somebody else then. Okay.
I've been very active in the forums since we had that very, very old, the previous ZX81 TS 1000 website. I was very active on that one. I've been active on all the ones, the Portuguese, the English ones, the Spanish ones, the Russian ones with translator. But I'm just a fan that loves the hardware, loves the history, loves the people. I just don't know how to use the soldering iron. I was the guy that was always sending things to Don Ding Dang in San Jose so he could share the schematics with everyone else. I was the guy who was always sending things to Jose in Spain so he could reverse engineer everything and share the schematics so everyone could have. So maybe I'm the one who provided the TS 1510 so it could be reverse engineered. That was like 13 years ago. I still have all the emails. But I could tell you guys about the people that I found a couple years ago. If anyone's interested, maybe it will ring some bells.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so many years ago, like 2006, I sent an email to Timex, and the Timex museum curator replied saying, "Hey, Lou Galley, senior vice president of Timex, wants to talk to you." I showed him your email. So we had a conversation. He was about to enter retirement. And he told me, "Hey, do you want all the Timex stuff that I still have, like prototypes and such?" I'm like, "Sure, here's my mailing address." So all the stuff that he still had is here, but the most notable one is the hard to get transparent TS 2068. He didn't mention Will, but he did mention someone that I had a chance to talk to, but I wasn't fast enough. Victor Schiff. He was the head of research and development at Timex. I don't know if Will remembers that name.
I remember Victor. Yeah. If I remember right, he was kind of a short, slender guy. I didn't work with him very much. He was on the hardware side of the house. Somebody you guys might be interested in talking to is Scott McCourt's wife, Kim, because she was in the hardware group at the time. I worked for Scott. Scott managed the software group and worked for Lou. Kim worked for the hardware group. I should probably send them David's contact information and stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit those folks up.
I usually like to tell. I hope that we're not all trying to reach these people at the same time. But a couple years ago, my emails were always saying who I was. Sorry to bother. Would you be willing to share some stories from back in the Timex days if you're this person? So I was trying to find everything. I was trying to find former employees of Sinclair when Sinclair actually had a building somewhere in the United States, and they had people working in the US before they asked Timex to do things here. So
I think that was that in
with,
Austin or Dallas or something like that?
I'm not sure, but I think the street had the name Sinclair Street or Sinclair Plaza.
There was a couple locations. There was it started out in Cambridge, and then they moved to Nashua, New Hampshire.
There you go. So I was also in touch. I don't know if these names ring any bells. Jeff Street, he used to write most software for Zebra systems. So he was Zebra's version of Will. Sorry.
Yes, Stuart is on the call, on the Zoom right now. And he said he would reach out to Jeff about joining us at some point. Great. So that would be fun too.
So, and then Lou, unfortunately, is no longer available. He expressed the idea that once he retired, that was it. So every time people ask me about it, I just say, hey, the last thing I got from him was, Bruno, I talked to Timex Legal, and they said everything made by Timex software-wise is now public domain. You guys can use it as you wish. You can share it online. We don't care. And I have that in writing. So that was that was a nice thing. I wish we could have done the same thing with Sinclair before they were sold and resold and resold. And there are a few key people from the past and people from a couple years ago. So we have this whole network of individuals that have stories to tell and have helped us a lot. Gary Grimes when I found him, he's like, how did you find me? I'm like, I just searched for the patents, and then there was your name, and I just used my Google foo, and I found you. So he sent me all the diagrams, all the pictures of when he was designing and when he saw Rick Dickinson's designs and how he adapted that to Timex. So I have all those emails in my Gmail account from years ago. I kept all that stuff. And then I kind of slowed down. Then when they opened the Sinclair Museum in Portugal, all the memories started flowing, and I started digging and providing all that information. Because I don't want to stalk people. We don't want to stalk them, but we want to preserve what they remember if they let us. That's my view on it.
Yeah, that's my goal too, in building out my website, just to preserve all of this stuff and make it, accessible to everybody here, everybody who's interested.
Yeah. So does anyone know what this is?
I do.
That's from Zebra.
Yes. That's the interface, the analog interface that they made
for the koala
pad.
See? So I could keep going and going, but I don't want to take all the time. Maybe some other day I could show you. Well, I have a lot of stuff from Europe and a lot of stuff that was sold in the US. Things that people would buy or make just so they could put more interfaces, slow down the hardware so they could play the game that they could never win. So
is that
right,
last thing for the Spectrum?
Yeah, but a lot of these things with Dong Ding Dang's twister board, you can actually use the interfaces on the TS2068. So I've been
I want to back up to that slow down machine, because I've always been confused. Like, the Spectrum's always been way too fast for me. I'm like, slow down, Spectrum, slow down.
3.5 megahertz of speed.
Especially when I've been using BASIC. I'm like, oh, you're out of control.
Yeah, and I mean, if games were in machine code and it was too fast for you, you could use this dial and slow down the machine so you could actually win the game.
Unbelievable.
So I have a lot more here, but today's call is mainly about what Will had to share with us, so I don't want to take too much time. But yeah, I could talk about this for hours, why I have all these EPROMs here that you could put in the cartridge, at the TS2068 cartridge. So instead of having a bunch of cartridges, you'd have just one cartridge, turn off the computer, put another one, turn it back on, just switch cartridges and play all the games and all the software you wanted.
Well, Bruno, where's all the Timex 1500 cartridges, man? That's what I'm looking for.
Oh, when they show up on eBay, people know that there are like 10 crazy people looking for them, and they just push the price as much as they can. Until recently, that cartridge that was used on the TS1000 for a store retail demo, I remember 15 years ago, I was saying, hey, if someone has that cartridge, I'll pay $500, and no one wanted to sell it. But now it's available.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
That's my problem too. I've been looking for cartridges for the the 1500, the 1510. I've been looking for the 1510, and luckily, I think it was about maybe 2 years ago, I found somebody that was I bought it from him brand new in the box, and we just made a video yesterday, me and Adam, and hopefully that'll be up on YouTube, so you'll kind of get to see that. But and then he also, after I bought that one from him, and I think it was around, I want to say $300 is what's digging in my mind right now for that thing. Now, granted, that thing was $20, right? Brand new from Timex.
Yeah.
So that's a heck of a, investment if anybody has one, and they spend $20 on it back in the day. But anyway, then he got in touch with me and said, hey man, I have another one. It's not in the box. It's just a 1510. Do you want to buy that one? And I was like, well, heck yeah. So how much you want for that one? I didn't give him a price, but I was like, and he said, well, what do you want for it? I said, I'll give you $100 for it. So again, 5 times what it was really originally worth. But so now I have 2 of those things. So I'm considering myself lucky for that. But again, the cartridges are just impossible to find. So if anybody knows anything or is willing to, let it go from their collection, I don't think anybody does, because I mean, why would you, let it go if you have one? But I'd like to
I
get at
know
least
where they
one
may
of those.
be. I know where they may be, but good luck. There was a store that closed, I think it's somewhere in the Midwest. It closed about 10, 12 years ago. And in the TS 2068 group, the one from Yahoo, someone in Canada and me, we were chosen to just give away everything that that store had from the Timex days, just for the price of, just to recover the cost of what we paid for shipping. And we did, but ultimately I lost contact with the person in Canada. He was the one shipping things to everyone. Then the Yahoo group closed, so I don't know. I don't know what's left. I don't know if those cartridges he wanted are somewhere in Canada.
Bruno,
I
did
think
you
his
join?
name was Ron.
Bruno, did you join the groups.io list?
Which one?
Somebody set up a version of the Yahoo group on groups.io, and I can send
No,
you
I didn't.
I'll put the link in the
I
chat.
think I just saw a link mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So if anyone finds Rod in Canada, ask him, hey, do you still have anything left from that store that the widow said we could pick up? And he'll let
Yeah,
you
the
know.
big
I lost
thing,
contact with him.
the big thing that I've noticed is, like I said, Timex made 4 cartridges. 3 of them people have dumped. I don't know why they didn't dump Flight Simulator. That we don't have a ROM for that. So anybody, yeah, Flight Simulator's high on the priority list if we can get a dump of it.
I have a question about the group in general, the TS 2068 group. So when I moved over from Yahoo Groups to the groups.io, from the Astrocade group, I was able to bring over all of the messages. Did that happen with the sorry about that, with the old Yahoo group messages? Did they transfer over?
No, but I got an archive of them, and I can share the link. It's on I uploaded it all to archive.org.
Well, I do know, like, if you have an actual archive of them, when they were closing down Yahoo, there's a way to take, if you're, who's in charge of who's in charge of the TS 2068? Oh, you don't know?
Don't know.
I thought it was you.
No, it was no. And I've, there's all these features that are available on it that I would love to use, but I have no idea who the person is, so we can't get it to do anything.
Oh,
yeah,
that's kind of shocking to me. I thought it was you, David.
No. Somebody beat me to the
feet?
punch. Someone beat me to the punch on that one.
But I do remember, you're right. When Yahoo's closing down, they gave like 6 months notice, right? And they said, hey, if you want to preserve your
Right.
group, they provided some link
Not
or
even
some
6 months
software.
notice. I had to pay groups.io, like, I think $300, and we raised the money. Like, I asked people in the Yahoo group to raise the money, and we got together, and then I just paid the transfer, and then groups.io did it like transparently, which was good, because doing it manually was a pain. And I would have done it if there was no other way, but it was able to done. So, that's too bad that the messages aren't there, because it's helpful. Like, when I'm, because there's like, the groups goes all the way back to 2001 for the Astrocade group. And I don't know how far back it went with the TS 2068 group, but
like 96.
96. Wow.
Or maybe even a little bit earlier. Yeah.
Well, Will, obviously you can see Timex has lived on in some degree. I mean, obviously not as.
I had no idea. It's really remarkable. It's pretty cool to see.
Because me and Adam were talking yesterday that I was saying, well, obviously when the ZX Spectrum came out, right, Timex was like, okay, we could make this into the the TS 2000, right, which I think was probably the initial thought. And then I think we were saying that what is it, Adam? Basically, he brought up the fact that, right, the FCC certification wouldn't have passed. Right. There was no shielding in that machine, but they could have done the similar thing to what they did with the 1000, right? They just basically spray painted the inside silver, right? And to shield it. But I think Timex at that point was like looking at the other companies. What's going on in the market, right? What's Commodore doing? What's Atari doing, right? What are I'm trying to think of some other brands, but and most of those machines, right, had cartridges or cartridge capabilities, right? So I'm sure that's one reason why they decided to put a cartridge on the 2068. They wanted the 2068 to have cartridge capability.
Yeah, well, you know,
And I,
you had, well, it's, one thing that's interesting to think about that was going on at the same time is that the IBM PC had come out, and for the price of, you know, for 2 floppy drives and a monochrome monitor, I remember I bought my first PC for $2,500.
yeah,
And
in 1982 money.
that's right. And so Timex and these other manufacturers were $199 or $99. And I remember seeing the ads for the original Sinclair for $99, I think it was. And it's like, oh my God, it's an actual little computer for $99. It's, you know, the equivalent today is the Raspberry Pi Zero that they gave away on the cover of the magazine. And I saw one girl had made an earring out of them. But all you needed was some mass storage, and then you had like a real little system.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you had no good way to get software loaded or data saved, it would remain sort of a hobbyist little widget forever.
Right.
I'm very fond of old HP calculators, and you know, HP had solved that problem with the card readers on the HP 65 and 67, and later the 41C. So mass storage and some kind of way to do that would have been the thing that the Timex computers and all their competition needed.
Yeah, right. And I just know, I think it was, what's his name, Tim Ross, or who was the Timex leader at the time? We were watching the video at him. Somebody Ross. Was it Tim Ross or is it
Dan Ross?
Dan Ross. That's right. I
Yes.
keep getting it wrong. I keep saying Tim, but it's Dan.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he was a bit, you know, in that video that they showed, you know, he was a big proponent of solid state software.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously for cartridges and things like that, because I mean, I'm just trying to think in my head and wrap around the fact that it costs Timex money to develop the 1510. It costs them money to develop the 1500 anyway, right? But you know, why would they go through the effort to put, you know, the development and costs involved in the cartridge player, right, for the 1500? And I'm sure it made some sense to somebody there. Obviously, it got done, and I'm glad it did. But like I said, you know, it just really kind of seemed to die on the vine. You know, it was like a little too late kind of thing. Again,
Well,
with
Carl,
Timex.
I think what Will is saying is exactly why that happened. I mean, it's come up in this group several times before that people have wondered how come certain software wasn't released for, like, we're talking about the 2068 here, but like it was basically for most people, it was a tape-based system. And that's how it was for the 1500 and the 1000. And so even if you had upgraded your 1000 or 1500 to more memory, and like you still were limited to tape. And if you were going to load a tape that was 48K, you know, or, you know, it was going to take you a while. So
Right.
the cartridge idea was really a smart one. It just, it didn't have time to catch on, and Timex was gone before anything had a chance to work out for that.
Well, but I'm just saying, you know, obviously the decision makers said, well, this is worth it. This isn't, you know, we're interested in this enough to put some money and development time into it. And obviously, you know, I think the 1510 design was done by Grimes, right? As far as I recall, he did the 1510. You know.
Oh yeah, the look and feel that was in.
Right, yeah. Right, exactly. He didn't do the 1500 itself, because that was just basically a really revised version of the Spectrum case. The Spectrum case, right? Yeah. They took the Spectrum logo off. I mean, the Sinclair logo, and they made those little fake vents, and they made it silver. And that's kind of where I was going to with the 2000, right, where they didn't pass FCC, and you know, they were showing the 2000 right at that in that video.
Right. I think it was at the Boston Computer Society in '83, I think.
Right. They were showing it there, but like I said, I don't think Timex really wanted to just bring out that. They didn't want to repeat what they did with the 1000, right, which is basically a ZX81, right, just with a new badge on it and shielding inside. You know, they didn't do any hardware engineering. It's all just you know, superficial things to get it to pass FCC. But On the 1500, luckily they had that case, and I guess they must have designed the silver because that gave them a platform to put the 1500 in, right? That was already done probably at that point. So it wasn't really any more money on the industrial design side. It was just, okay, we need to make a motherboard for the 1000, right, that would fit inside the Spectrum case, and obviously they put enough money into it to make their own, to redesign the SCLD with NCR, right? They made the ULA. I don't know what you would call it in the 1500. I keep calling it the SCLD because that's just what I think that chip really is. Even
Yeah,
in the
it's
1500.
right. Yeah,
it's a standard logic cell design or whatever they called it there. But
yep.
But it was a Timex design, right? So that obviously cost some money and time.
Yep. Yep.
to
There's
do
a whole
that.
bunch of iterations of that thing I have sitting in a drawer. Well, I have a completely left field question, and that is, what did a test engineer do? So before Timex, what was it that you did that made, that was
before Timex?
Yeah.
So my first job was on Robins Air Force Base in Georgia, and we were writing test software to run on an automated testing machine to test the radar cards out of the E3A. The E3A was a Boeing 707 with a big frisbee on top that did air traffic control and radar for areas. And so you get an automated testing machine and you make a connector for the board so that the board can be mounted on the machine. And then your software will set inputs and read outputs and see if the board does what it's supposed to do.
That's crazy. Okay. Very interesting.
So when I was a test engineer for General Datacom, we manufactured, and that was the job I had right before Timex. And I was only there about a year because I got the opportunity to go to Timex. At General Datacom, they made modems and multiplexers. And
what year were you in General Datacom? I worked for General Datacom, 86 to 96.
Oh, no way.
This is how small the world is.
Jeez. I was at General Datacom from something like February of 1982 to about, I don't know, February or so of 83. I was there about a year.
Chuck Johnson.
Chuck? Oh, Chuck was the guy, right?
Well, General Datacom was the telecommunication manufacturer equipment manufacturer company. It was like a university.
Did you see a product there called the StatMux?
Absolutely.
So let me tell you about the StatMux.
I have EEPROMs. I have EEPROMs for 1262 testing.
Oh, Jesus.
Sorry.
So I don't know if they took my thing and ran with it after I left, but here's what happened with the StatMux. The StatMux was a Motorola 6809 design, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And I had to figure out how to test it. So the way the test engineering group had done, they had bought a little Z80 base desktop workstation and hung a bunch of ribbon cables out of the back on the address bus and data bus and built a box full of parallel ports so that then you could write software and set the pins on the output and read the inputs on those ports. That was all done by Z80 assembly, and I was writing that stuff. For the StatMux, the puzzle was it had a 6809 on the board, how to test that board, because it had like four synchronous channel communicators and an aggregate line, and then it had the 6809 on the board, and it had, I don't know, it must have had 16K or 48K worth of ROM on the StatMux board. So did you know a guy named Gary Prophet?
No, I was in Los Angeles. I was the
you were in Los Angeles.
manager.
Okay, this was in Danbury. So Gary Prophet was the hardware designer on the StatMux. I said, Gary, can you give me a chip? Can you give me a chip select line so that I can pull it down with the tester and switch out the ROMs on the board and switch in my ROMs that's in the test fixture? And he said, oh yeah, good idea. So we did that. And so the way the test ran was you took the board, put it on the test fixture and punched go. The Z80 code would control the outputs to the board. They would pull down chip select and it would disable the ROMs on the StatMux motherboard, and it would connect it to the ROMs that had my 6809 code in my ROMs. And so the board tested itself and reported status back to the Z80 through the parallel port. So that was my design. That was the last thing I did for General Datacom.
So I got to say, Will, it sounds like the Timex work would have been a cakewalk in comparison.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was
It's a whole lot less hardware.
yeah, it was but I was in the design group then. The test engineering group was kind of fun, and that was a fun project. Have any of you guys looked at the 6809 processor compared to the Z80?
I used to own a Radio Shack color computer, so yeah, I'm pretty familiar with the
You
809.
ever look at it from the assembly language point of view?
Yeah, well, and you know, it's funny you should say that, because I remember, you know, having a discussion with somebody back in the 80s, and I owned a Commodore 64 at the time, and he had a color computer, and he was going on and on about how it could do 16-bit math, you know, and how much, you know, more powerful the CPU was. And I was like, huh, that's really cool. So then I sold my 64 and got a Coco.
Nice. Yeah, it's the 6809 kind of from the machine architecture point of view is a beautiful instruction set. It's my favorite processor, I think, ever. But I think the Z80's die might have been smaller. It might have been cheaper to build and stuff like that, which, you know, that's why the 8086 and 8088 beat out the 68,000 for the PC computer world, is it was a cheaper die. And even though the instruction said it's a train wreck by comparison.
So we have another former aerospace test equipment person, Stuart Neufeld, who started Zebra Systems, which Bruno was showing some of the Zebra Systems products earlier. Stuart says that his first 2 aerospace jobs, he designed test equipment.
Yeah.
Stuart, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, my first job, when I started Zebra Systems in 1983, that was actually, I was 36 years old or something, and it was my 4th job. It was a business, but I was employed by other companies before. And the first 2, I had an electrical engineering degree. My first job, I tested explosive devices.
I'm going to bring us back to the Timex stuff real quick, since we have about 10 minutes left. Will, thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to join us in the future, you know, and hear more craziness, we're happy to have you. You know,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, you know, your knowledge of Z80 programming, you've really retained it for so long. I suspect Adam wants to learn some Z80 programming. You know, if you wanted to, you know, run a workshop or something, I don't think people would be, you know, too averse to that.
Is there a course on Udemy for Z80 assembler?
I don't know, but that's a good idea. You know, having like a little online.
There might be a course on Udemy. I'm pretty sure they have some assembly language courses, but I don't know.
Well, I have something I could say here, since so I've been asking about this in the group, you know, for a while, and I have plenty of experience with the Z80. And Tim, who's present now, he wrote an article called "Converting Spectrum Assembly Programs to the Timex Sinclair 2068," which has been super helpful.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And I have experience with the Z80 in various ways, and other machine, like I've messed around with the 6800 and 6502 and stuff, and blah, blah, blah. But I've been reading this book. I don't know if you can see it well enough, but it's on programming the the Spectrum, and it's from '82. And like the beginning of it's like a refresher in Z80. So that's doing me pretty good. And Carl and I were talking about Z80 programming yesterday. In fact, I'm pretty sure he may be one of the only people in Albuquerque who I can get together with and talk shop about the Z80. And we had a friendly little argument yesterday when I was like, I think the Z80 can run 8080 code, and he's like, I don't think so. We were looking it up, and yeah, it can. Yeah,
because the CPM, the whole CPM world had that experience.
Right, exactly. That's what I was saying.
Right.
But it was fun to find out in a friendly manner rather than going, well, I'll tell you what, in a forum, you're wrong, because that's how things seem to bog down.
Yeah, because we looked at the opcodes, we looked at the mnemonics are different, obviously, right? That's why I really like the Z. Yeah, that's why I like the Z80 mnemonics, because they make sense to me personally. The mnemonics that Intel created are just like, what the hell were they thinking when they made these mnemonics? But anyway, yeah. So go on.
Oh shoot! Don't leave me hanging here. So yeah, with Tim's help here, and I think it was Tim or Jeff. Jeff is here. Jeff is here, and he was pointing me out to a few videos that I guess I'm old school. I read books, and I mean I watch videos and stuff, but not to learn normally. And there's I think it's a 25-part series on learning Z80 coding specifically for the Spectrum.
Is that Andrew?
ZX81.
Sorry, Adam. Is that Andrew Dansbury's series of videos?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just
I know that
and started watching it.
He's been writing doing a bunch of videos about learning Z80 programming for the Spectrum.
I kind of want to pose the question, back in those days, right? And most things were programmed in assembly. Higher level, programming was just starting to, or Pascal or Fortran or, but when you get down to the machine code level, that was a lot of things were done that way. But now I'm kind of thinking today, you don't really see that much, right? I mean, it's all object-oriented languages, right? It's C, C, and go ahead.
I think it depends on what you're doing. So an old friend that I went to elementary school with and all that I've known forever, he was on the original Macintosh team in '84, managing third-party software developers. And then he went to Microsoft and wrote a bunch of code. And then he went to Google and wrote a bunch of code. Now he's retired, living in a very nice house. But I've talked to him, over the year. He's written an enormous amount of high-end code, and for a lot of the low-level stuff you guys are talking about, it's all done in C still. A lot of it is, or C++. That's what's used mostly nowadays for that kind of stuff. Very little of it will get turned into assembly, and some of it gets turned into those big wide instructions that the GPUs use. And if you're doing that kind of processing, but I don't think they do assembly too much anymore for the low level stuff. It has to really be insanely critical for speed, I would imagine, before anybody would whip out the assembler.
Well, and that's the thing about the old micros. There just weren't that many cycles to do anything, so you were sort of mandated to write it in assembly if you wanted anything to be done that was fairly complex fairly quickly.
That's right.
And it's one parting shot. There's a reason why object-oriented programming is called OOP.
That's terrible, Jeff.
I guess kind of my point was that, that I don't think there's assembly language.
That's how you really fit.
Yeah, I just don't think there's really much. I mean, obviously, I think there's a resurgence in obviously these old machines, so that's why I think there's kind of a rebirth, so to speak, of maybe programming in assembly language, right? But I think if you go on a modern machine, you're not going to be doing any kind of assembly language. There's no classes on assembly language anymore.
No, one of the most interesting forays into assembly language I've made in the last few years is there at the other end of the spectrum. There's a mainframe, an IBM mainframe emulator that runs on a PC just fine, and you can do mainframe assembly on a PC, and that's a different world. Because you do it under MVS, and it's actually running MVS on your PC, and it runs it faster than the mainframe that was running the university when I was in school.
Do you know what
And-
program Timex was using for your assembly? I mean, there had to be some type of assembly program.
Boy, there was, we had this crazy little development system. I'm assuming it was a Zilog little development system. It was 8-inch floppy based. The funny story that Scott McCourt might remember was when, and I was telling David about this the other day, when we got this little development system, we had this, typical office table, and we were going to put it on. And so we had a prom burner and the development system and a CRT, and there was like half a dozen things that needed to be plugged in. And so we threw it all on the table and set it all up, and I crawled under the table and plugged everything back in, and I came up, flipped the switch, and nothing worked. And the other guys in the software group were standing there watching me, the guy with the electrical engineering degree. And of course, I had plugged in the power strip into itself.
Yeah, we still have not invented the perpetual motion machine there, Will.
Yeah. So I was like, so anyway, there went my image as somebody who knew what was going on.
I was gonna thought you're saying you blew the breaker or something like that, because I've been to LAN parties where we've done that.
Oh, no, this is, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll set this up, and crawl under there and and then do that. All right.
Yeah, because I just was wondering what Timex might have used as their assembly. So if you were using a Zilog system, from them directly.
I think that's what we used. It was not hard to use, as I recall. We would assemble the thing and then change it into the hex format, whatever it was that the prom burner took, and load it over in the prom burner and burn the prom, plug in the chip, and run a test. So.
Because I know in my early days, I used, at least on the Timex, I used Ray Kingsley's Hot Z. When I did assembly on the Timex. And then for the IBM PC, I used, of course, MASM, right? Microsoft Assembler.
Right.
So,
yeah. It's been a long time since I've done any assembly. Well, it's been since, 83, since I've done it for a living.
Wow.
And I played around with the IBM, and that's it. I haven't done any in that amount of time.
Since we're wrapping things up, because I know David wants to keep it, well, not short, I guess 2 hours.
I want to keep it tight. I want to keep it tight to 2 hours.
Yeah, we want to close it out on time. So some of the things that we've talked about, I'd like to see if we can talk about in a future meeting, because we'll meet again in 2 weeks on a Monday. Is that right?
That's correct.
I would like to hear from Bruno. It's not that I don't want to hear from everybody, but I would like to hear from Bruno. Seems like he's got some really exciting stuff to share with us. And being pretty selfish here, I would like to hear if Tim or Jeff wants to, talk about how they work with the Z80 in modern times. I know that Tim uses Linux, and Jeff, I don't know what Jeff uses. What do you use, Jeff?
He uses the 2068. He codes right on metal.
No, I work on Windows. I have, Linux is okay, but.
Okay, but I'd like to hear that. And it's always good to hear from Stuart. And I saw that Bruno had some questions for Stuart, but maybe we can save those for next time.
No more.
So
Who's talking?
we'll do that.
Next time.
We'll pick up all this stuff on Monday in 2 weeks.
And I want to encourage, I think everyone here is a member except for Bruno. And so Bruno, definitely join the TS 2068 over at groups.io. And maybe if you used to be a member when it was Yahoo, so you don't need to probably go through those old messages, but there's a treasure trove of stuff in there.
Yeah.
Will do. Thank you.
And thanks awesome. Again, Will. Really appreciate you taking
great
the
stuff.
time
Glad to talk, guys. Appreciate
Thank you, Will.
having me here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Nice meeting you, Will, from General Datacom.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, you take care of yourself. All right.
All right. Love it, guys.
See you.
I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Great meeting. Fun.
Bye all.
Bye.